Let me show you a case of one of my patients. This was actually one of the earlier cases I had related to amniotic membrane cryopreserved forms as in ProCare. It was a 58-year-old gentleman. He had had diabetes for more than 18 years, but it wasn't just so much that he had it for this time period, is that he really did have a pretty advanced case. He had proliferative diabetic retinopathy, for which he had PRP. He's currently moderate severe non-proliferative, but being monitored closely for that. He's had, as I talked about, previous surgery, and all this was in the last year. He also comments on peripheral neuropathy in both his hands and his feet, which gives us kind of an idea that this is probably not something that may heal the way we would want it to be, just for those two reasons alone. So you're always looking for those key historic components to help you in managing these patients. He's on a couple medications for his diabetes and another one for hypertension. He's 20 hand motion, as you'll see from the image. That's not a surprise when you see this fairly, significant central epithelial defect that's been persistent now, somewhere around 5 millimeters, 4.5 by 5.5. His chief complaint, interestingly enough, is just blurred vision, but he does have some, it feels like something's in his eye. He does say foreign body sensation periodically. Probably a little disproportionate to the persistent epithelial defect, but certainly present. He presented with an abrasion 2 weeks prior, and he probably had it for 2 weeks prior to that before seeing the eye doctor. You wonder, why would someone wait 2 weeks? But perhaps because of the neuropathy, he wasn't in quite the pain level. Then he had it checked. He was treated for 2 weeks with preservative-free artificial tears and ointments initially, then on to a bandaged contact lens. The epithelial defect barely budged. We talked about how important it is to kind of keep it going, but really, to just treat it sooner. This was 2 weeks. He's currently on an antibiotic, which is fortunate, and that's what he presented with, just a very central, 4x5 persistent epithelial defect. Now, it's interesting if you look to the right, how you can see fibrosis already forming, which makes you worry this is going to be a serious problem. He has significant edema with desiccated folds. Well, after the placement of the cryopreserved amniotic membrane, this is literally 4 days later. We placed it on a Tuesday, had to take it out on a Friday because it's going into the weekend. Otherwise, would have tried to leave it that 5th day. He used the moxifloxacin while he had this, but just once or twice a day. He cut it back because of the antimicrobial properties of the CAM itself. Patients, I do tape them. We'll talk more about that in the panel questions. Here he is, 2060. You can see that area already finally healing. He's had a month of no movement with everything passive. He closed within 4 days. What fascinates me, though, about cryopreserved amniotic membrane is that I didn't really do anything more. I saw him back at day 14. Back then, I was seeing him about every 2 weeks after, still curious about how this was working. So it's one of my older cases. Look at his central cornea now. He still has the inferior staining, which we didn't focus on too much, but look at how it's closing in that area. He wished he'd done this sooner, was his main comment. He's now down to 2025. And then finally, he healed up even beyond that, believe it or not, at a month.